Welcome to the Worldwide Teach-In on Climate and Justice.
Bienvenue à la conférence mondiale éducative sur le climat et la justice.
Bem-vindo ao encontro participativo global sobre clima e justiça.
Today we are coming together globally to share our concern for the climate crisis, for climate justice, and to find solutions. We understand that carbon pollution is causing the planet to heat up. We see the fires and floods, the droughts and crop failures. This teach-in will help us all move from despair about this to determination together to change the future. Why climate and justice? Global warming is profoundly unjust. People in low-income communities are already suffering the most as the planet heats up. In the last year, tens of millions of people have been forced to leave their homes by climate change, more refugees than from conflict and violence combined. We can stop this. We can stabilize the climate, and in doing so, create jobs and opportunities for all in a new green economy. What will it take? Our hard work and the courage to face it.
It's not really that bad.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Climate change, it's pretty close to home for South Carolina.
From the UK's wettest February on record to raging wildfires in California.
These winds die down. This fire is unstoppable.
Ferocious fires scorch terrain as Earth
Water
heats.
shortages forcing more than 13 million people to have to boil their water before they can use it. Marcus Moore.
It can take air out of my little brother's lungs.
What if it submerges my Bangladeshi land of love, magic, stories, and songs?
I'm afraid my hands can do nothing to stop the downpour.
I'm afraid it will leave us alone in a world of concrete and plastic.
Groom Gaia into a vacant void.
It will take the green and leave us in the dark.
I'm afraid it will bring out the worst in people.
Uprooting our families and communities.
Leaving our children to an irreversible nightmare.
Taking the beauty of each season from us.
Causing untold suffering that could have been prevented.
I am afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid. What are we being taught?
What are they teaching us?
Economics, literature, math, engineering, history, music.
What meaning do they hold if our climate swallows us whole?
I can be courageous.
I can be courageous.
I can use my voice and passion, keep fighting even on the days it feels hopeless.
I can fight for my people. I can hold on to the beauty we still have.
I can save our land against this man-made havoc.
I can be a voice for the sky, the soil, and the sea.
I can make a good future for our next generation.
I can stand up even when it feels easier to sit down.
I can love my brothers and sisters and protect their lives because we have the same mother, the great Mother Earth.
I can be louder than polluters that try to silence life.
I can do my part and lead others around me to do better.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
I can ask my teacher to make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
To make climate a class.
Make climate a class.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to UNE's one-night teach-in for climate and justice. My name is Bethany Woodworth, and I'm professor in the School of Marine and Environmental Programs, and I'm also coordinator of UNE's interdisciplinary minor in climate change studies. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wabanaki Nation, which includes the Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy people, on whose ancient and sacred land we live, work, and play. As a community, we recognize the ever-present systemic inequalities and inequities that stem directly from past wrongdoing, and we commit ourselves to respecting and reconciling this long history of injustice. Solving the dual and intertwined challenges of climate and justice will require the expertise and ways of knowing of all of us. This is ethicists and economists, philosophers, psychologists and scientists, artists and physicians, writers and business persons and sociologists. And so tonight we have brought together colleagues from 26 different disciplines across the University of New England community. We will begin the evening with a keynote address from the Reverend Lennox Yearwood, and following that there will be 2 breakout sessions, one at 6 o'clock and one at 7 o'clock. You will be able to select from between 3 and 4 different panels to attend during each of those breakout sessions. The highlight of the panels will be what we hope is an invigorating and robust discussion among all of the attendees about the issues raised during the session. At this point, it is my pleasure to introduce the 6th president of the University of New England, Dr. James Herbert. Since assuming the UNE helm in 2017, President Herbert has overseen the creation and implementation of UNE's current strategic plan, Our World, Our Future, and he has led the university in making a number of important investments in the programs and students. He has led the effort to decarbonize UNE's investment portfolio and has overseen our progress towards becoming carbon neutral by 2040. He has also ingrained his warm and engaging presence in the daily lives of our students and our faculty. Please join me in welcoming President Herbert.
That's very kind, thank you. The microphone up here. So, hello everyone. It is nice to see such a great turnout for this evening. I'm really glad to see you all and to see so many people where I can actually see you from the nose down as well. So it's nice that we're finally able to begin removing the masks. I am so glad that UNE is able to participate in this global event, this worldwide impactful event looking to create a healthier planet for all of us. And I'd like to begin my remarks by thanking Bethany Woodward, Alethea Caridi, where's Alethea? I know she's here somewhere, and Colleen Bader for working tirelessly to plan this valuable evening with so many moving parts that they had to coordinate. So very grateful to you guys for your help. At the same time, I'd like to express my gratitude to 2 organizations that partnered with UNE to sponsor tonight. And those are the Climate Initiative and the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust. So thank you to both organizations for co-partnering with us. And I'd also like to acknowledge the many members of our UNE faculty and professional staff that are participating tonight in these panel discussions. So thank you all. So I think more than any other event that I can remember during my tenure here at UNE so far, this event embodies our institution's tripartite commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to robust discourse, and to the health of our planet. As you'll see, the complexities of these interwoven issues cut across disciplinary silos. Every field that we study here at UNE is somehow touched by and/or contributes to addressing climate change as well as social inequality and injustice. We will address these challenges using evidence and reason, sharpened through the process of robust discourse. The format of tonight's event, short panel presentations followed by ample discussion time, emphasizes the interdisciplinary and interpersonal approaches that we so value here at UNE. Tonight's program focuses our attention on 2 of the greatest challenges of our time. But knowing that UNE will bring the full measure of our expertise and talent to meet them gives me some degree of hope. Thank you to all the members of our community who are committed to this work, but most of all to our students, many of whom are with us here tonight. Students, I've seen how passionate and driven you are when it comes to fighting for the health of our planet and combating injustice. And I know you will carry on the work long after your professors have ceded the leadership roles that they now hold in your fields. I know you will use the spirit of innovation, the critical thinking, problem solving, and communication skills, and the dogged perseverance you've nurtured during your time here at UNE to shape our world into a better one. Hopefully tonight's activities will help you clarify the roles that you can play in your fields to create the future that we all imagine. And I'm sure tonight's speaker will bring greater clarity to our mission as well. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce him. Reverend Lennox Yearwood, Lennox Yearwood Jr. So Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. is the president and founder of the Hip Hop Caucus, making him one of the most influential people in hip-hop political life today. This nonprofit, nonpartisan, multi-issue organization is dedicated to addressing core challenges facing underserved and vulnerable communities with programs and campaigns that support solution-driven community organization led by today's young people. As a national leader within the Green Movement, the Reverend Yearwood has been working to bridge the gap between communities of color and environmental advocacy. With a diverse set of celebrity allies, he has raised awareness and action in communities that are often overlooked by traditional environmental campaigns and elected officials. His innovative stance has garnered the Hip Hop Caucus support from several environmental leaders, including the Sunrise Movement, the League of Conservation Voters, Earth Justice, and Zero Hour. The Reverend Yearwood is a leading voice in calling for divestment from fossil fuels, as well as in efforts to increase diversity in the climate movement and to ensure that everyone has clean air and water. He has fought on the front lines for vulnerable communities, including at the international climate negotiations in Paris and in efforts to fight a new oil pipeline developments in Maryland and Standing Rock. He's been dubbed a new green hero by Rolling Stone magazine and recognized by the Obama White House as a champion of change. So please join me in giving a big nor'easter welcome to the Reverend Yearwood.
Really honored to be here at the University of New England. Want to make sure, do you say UNE or is any other, that's how you say, no, in DC they have all kind of acronyms, so maybe, you know, everything, they kind of just blend together. But really an honor to be here. Thank you for having me. I actually know your school because both my sons now go to school in Maine. And so one of my sons, are there any hockey players here? No hockey players. Okay, well, got to get them here for the climate stuff now. That's some, you know, they should be here front row. That ice is kind of important, you know what I mean? It gets too hot. They go on and, well, nothing to do. We have to get their rollerblades out. So they're going to need to figure that one out. So you got to tell them that. Tell them y'all missed your moment. You had one moment here at UNE and you missed it. Rev shouted you out and you weren't even there to get it. So my son plays hockey. He actually goes to Central Maine Community College. And so he actually is there and he plays college. And so first time I ever saw a UNE uniform was when he was playing them, actually. So was there, and that was my first time. And then I actually met you, a lot of you amazing students at Colby College. I know some of you, I actually had the opportunity to speak there, and then you guys came up, and it was just great to meet you. And then I immediately recognized that you had a wonderful, I could just tell then that you had a wonderful environment, and you should be excited about that. Nothing else. That I got to meet your staff and folks who welcomed me very much so, which was just a very lovely welcome. Your president, very lovely president. Actually, he's from my neck of the woods originally, from where he was from. I'm originally from Louisiana. He's really from Texas. So, you know, we both really don't do well in snow, I guess. That's probably how that goes. So it's really an honor to be here and to have this conversation with you. I wanted to start off with something very special, actually, just for you. I've never done this before. And so and we're here, so why not? You'll get something very special. Did anybody here see the movie Don't Look Up? Let me see. Okay, 90% of you. So I don't want to give, for those who didn't see it, it came out like in December, so you should have saw it then. So unfortunately, I'm going to start, but Netflix asked me and several other climate advocates to present a different ending to that. And so I actually want to read to you my ending for Netflix. Is that okay? Yeah. All right, well, here you go. So you can go to Netflix and you can see everybody else. I don't know if they're going to read it to you like I'm about to read it to you right now, though. So you about to get an extra treat in that aspect. But so this is my ending for the movie. This thing kicked us off into our conversation. So they literally asked a question at Netflix. They said, could Don't Look Up have ended differently? And so they went further to ask 14 climate experts about their position on that. So you can read it. You can actually, it just came out. But this is mine. So this is my, and I can actually say that they put mine right up top there. So I guess I'm not sure if they liked it or not. They just put it there. But so this is how it goes. So this is how I thought it should have ended. Now, I will tell you this. Netflix gave me some parameters, though. They said that I can't have the world destroyed in our version. And I was like, well, that's kind of a bummer. I mean, we take away, I got to save the place then. That's kind of a challenge. So that was everyone who had to do this. So anyways, my title, that new title, was called Look to Flint. And so after Kate DiBiase, who was Jennifer Lawrence, tells people at Bojo Mambo's why the comet diversion mission was turned around, a special news report featuring morning talk show hosts Jack Bremer and Bree Evanfy, which was Tyler Perry and Kate Blanchett, takes over TVs everywhere. The hosts admit that they were wrong and urge people to look up. Media across the globe, from Washington, D.C. to Rio, began to broadcast the truth, and global mobilization ensures. In Michigan, a group of audio engineering students at Flint Central High School get in contact with Kate and Randall, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, to share a unique solution. The students develop technology that allows them to move large objects via sound waves. They have been pranking people in their neighborhoods by moving parked cars from one side of the street to the other. So collectively, they present their solution to President Orlean, but she and an elite group of billionaires have already undergone the freezing method and have launched into space. Scientists at NASA figure this out and amplify the students' technology, making it strong enough to divert the comet in time to save humanity. A new collective future is ushered in on Earth with President Orlean and the billionaires meeting their fate on another planet 22,000 years later. Look to Flint. So that was, and there were some amazing other things that were there. So I lead with that, with the power of storytelling and narrative organizing. The one thing about this crisis that we're in is that it's a real crisis that we're in and that we as humanity have to solve. It is not a black crisis or a white crisis or a brown crisis or a red crisis. or a male crisis, or a female crisis, or a straight crisis, or a gay crisis, or a theist crisis, or atheist crisis. It is a human crisis that we are living in right now. It's a real crisis. That's the thing that I have to tell you. Leave nothing else. Know that we are in a real crisis. We're in a crisis in which literally our planet, our home, is in a place where it will not be livable for us in certain ways. Or it becomes so disastrous, so uncontrollable in regards to our weather patterns by having droughts and wildfires and you name it, hurricanes and tornadoes and wars, that it will become a place that will be not only hostile, it will become a place that will be literally a place that will be unlivable for humanity. So it is something that doesn't matter if your political background or your geographic background, if you're Republican or Democrat, if you're from America or some other place on this amazing planet. It is a crisis that we have to solve. If we don't solve it, President, then one of the things here that we will find out quickly is that it will solve itself. Hence my hat. I wear a lot of hats. And my hat that I'm wearing now is one that is really in regards to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is put forth by the UN. And they had put out a report that said we had 12 years to make things happen. Literally that we've already gone too far in many cases. So to some aspects, the die is cast. But they had put forth by numerous scientists saying that we still have these 12 years to literally make some things happen. If we come together, get wise up, we can begin to push things forward. And so every single year since that report came out, I've been just getting a new hat. And so I had 12 years, and now I had 11. And so and I was 10, I was 9, and it's 8. So it's actually quite a depressing hat, to be honest. But it gets the point across in some aspects that this is where we are. So we're in a moment where we have 8 years to really make the changes, which is one, daunting, but also, on the other hand, incredibly inspiring for you and for your colleagues to say that we as humans can come together and make a change. So with that, my job is to do exactly what the movie Don't Look Up was trying to do, which is try to convey through narrative, organizing, and storytelling the best way to broaden and grow this movement. Because the problem is that there are many people who actually don't even know that we're in a crisis. Imagine now if, God forbid, that this building was on fire and the alarms were not working in this room. Everybody else heard the alarms and they've all streamed out. They don't even know we're in here. And while we're in here, the building is on fire being consumed. And we literally, to the point, to the last minute, looked over and saw, oh, wow, President, I don't think you got a barbecue in the hallway, do you? You're like, no, I don't think we do. And so in that aspect, it would be too late for us. That's where we are in this crisis. That's my job. I want us to get outside of the building because the building, in the words of Greta Thunberg, is on fire. And so I want us to get out of the building in a way that we can escape the catastrophe that we're in. So with me, my job at Hip Hop Caucus and the many amazing folks there has been to use storytelling and narrative organizing to do that. And we've been doing that for the past now 15, 16 years, just without doubt. Now, that comes with a cost. I must tell you how that story starts. As I mentioned, I'm originally from Louisiana. So back in 2005, many of you who were just young lads, or even not even born, I'm not even sure you were, I'm not sure how old you were. Since my kid goes to school alongside you, I can tell you how he was 5 and 4 or 3 or 2, wherever he was. He was a baby, so he really wasn't paying too much mind. But most of you have seen things and visuals of Hurricane Katrina. And in that aspect, with that storm, that shaped me. Because I, being from Louisiana, I having family in New Orleans, literally saw my family and friends drowning before my eyes. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time. And there's nothing worse than to turn on CNN and you recognize people. That's really a bad thing. I hope you never had that experience. If you turn on your TV and you recognize, oh, that's my market, and that's the street where Mama D lives, and that's where Seth's is around the corner from there, where his record store is. And you begin to recognize that, hold on, that's the top of where his record store would be, but the rest of it is underwater. And you begin to realize that this is a disaster. And so in that aspect with Hurricane Katrina, I watched particularly my community, particularly poor people and black people, literally drowning in the richest country in the world. And being president of the Hip Hop Caucus, I began to say we have to do something to move to action. Now, that story gets even deeper because there were people who were in that process who literally, folks like Mama D, who lived on Derjewan Street in the 7th Ward, who literally was, when the waters came, she stayed behind. And Mama D was around 60 at the time. Beautiful, beautiful black woman with amazing gray dreadlocks, just all the way down the back to the crest of her back. And Mama D and her son literally stayed in their home, but as the senior citizens in her neighborhood began to float down the street, like coming down the steps here, she would see them as they were floating down the street, catch them, and tie them to the tree because she didn't want them to be eaten by alligators or literally just be lost. That is what this can do. I need that, you get that visual. This is something that is horrific, that when we and our planet begins to go against us, it is horrific, the consequences of the climate crisis. It is not a nice thing. It is a very ugly thing that begins to transpire in these communities. So Mama D would tie them to the tree, and most of you were too young, some of you who are a little older saw what happened. Then people were left behind, and people were then put on buses, and people were sent away in that aspect. But we didn't learn then. That was the first thing. We didn't learn then back in 2005 at that moment to make changes. As a matter of fact, this is where the other, to be honest, the villain comes into the story. There's a fossil fuel industry that makes quite a lot of money. It's unfortunate because we did use a lot of that to make our world better at one time. We had an industrial age, and there was a time where we used fossil fuels, but now we realize, as my hat and other things says, we cannot continue to do and live like that. We cannot continue to burn coal and use gas and use oil. It's just that we have to transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. It's just the way it is. If we continue to use it, then we are going to continue to have horrific consequences. Unfortunately, there's something called greed and money, and there are those who don't want to transition or don't want to transition fast enough. And so when Hurricane Katrina was brought into the scene, it was a situation in that aspect that they then literally began to create climate denial. That was the time when they said, well, people are going to be heartfelt by these horrific things that they're seeing, so we're going to just deny this happening at all. We're just going to just say there is no such thing as climate crisis. So we're just going to say it's not happening. What you see is not the fire in the hallway. You're not seeing that. What you're really seeing is just nothing. It's made up. They're just doing it. It's a left-wing propaganda. It's a joke. Forget that. And so, unfortunately, that began to divide our country. We're now in a bad situation. People have taken sides. And you move forward, though, that really doesn't work because now more and more people are realizing, oh, hold on. We're getting more and more hurricanes. We're now going through the Greek alphabet in hurricanes. We now have wildfires. We now have droughts. We now have just some consequences that are terrible. There's bleaching going on. Literally this week or last week, part of the Arctic fell off the size of New York. We're in a really rough situation. So now climate denial doesn't work as a strategy anymore. So they moved from climate denial to climate delay. Well, we're just going to delay the policies to help this process. We're going to do all we can. And then from there, the climate dilute. If you do get policies, then we're going to make them so watered down we can't do anything. So that's where we are. We're in a situation now in which we are literally in a crisis. But we have those who do not want to transition. So what do we do about it? How do we get there? That's where our conversation is. Now, one of the things about this conversation about environmental justice, and climate justice is that it also links into other things that are going on at the same time. So one of the things that I will say is that climate justice is also racial justice, and racial justice is climate justice. Now, some of you might say, well, how does that work, Rev? How does climate justice and racial justice, is the air racist, is the water racist? No, not at all. Thank goodness for that. No, my goodness, I could take it if that was the case. You know what I'm saying? I water my pipe in the morning and turn it on, and like, water don't come out, and say, yeah, I ain't going to no black homes. Oh, my goodness. It's ridiculous. The water racist, oh, no. But what is racist is the process of the planning and the programming that goes alongside that. So what happens there is that people then look at communities and they say that that community is either a community that will not fight or becomes a sacrifice zone. That community is a path of least resistance. And because of, unfortunately, it might be, and sometimes not just racist, but this also economics play. Poor white people play this. That community is the community that we can just build a pipeline through, or put our plant next to, or put our pollution next to, or put our landfill next to, or put our chemical industries next to, because their lives are not worth, or maybe their lives are not worth, or pretty much they don't have the capacity to fight. They don't have good lawyers and good policy. They can't just call up who they need to call up to make change. So because of that, we can put our stuff there, we can do it, we can make it cheap, make it happen. And that's how it becomes environmental injustice. And that's how race and poverty begin to play with our climate. Because then they put these things in those communities. As a matter of fact, did you know that 68% of people of color live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant? Like literally, that's where there's so many places. Like, and it begins to connect. Like they're literally living next to these facilities in these many cases. And so that's the thing. But those same facilities don't stop there. And that actually begins the crisis. Now, this is where we come in at with our movement. The thing here with our movement is that, well, how do we get a movement that looks like a predominantly white movement that's harming people of color? Why isn't that movement balanced? And so to some degree, this is where the climate movement must take responsibility for a lot of the actions that they are in this position. So one of the things there that I just wanted to give a little bit of history in this is that we're having a teach-in today, and I love that. That's such a wonderful thing. There's history behind a teach-in. This is really for those who are really, really good. This is for the old school folks right there. Back in the day when the first Earth Day was created, the first Earth Day was actually considered and called supposed to be a teach-in for the planet. That was the Senator Nelson from Wisconsin and many others who had came together and said, we're going to do this teach-in for America. And then that was before 1970, back around 1969. And that was really the birth of the environmental movement. And at that point in time, they were planning on the first Earth Day, which would take place on April 22nd, 1970. And in that aspect, when they're planning this first Earth Day, they're doing this teach-in. And in this teach-in, they begin to, at that time, really actually want to pull everybody together. A lot of things are happening in the world. Obviously, Dr. King had just been assassinated in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee. Ironically, fighting for sanitation workers, one of the first environmental justice actually movements being born with the I Am a Man process in Memphis, Tennessee. And then you go further, there's a burgeoning gay rights and trans rights movement that's coming out of New York City. In that process, there's a powerful women's movement that is coming across this country. There's a powerful indigenous movement that's actually taking over Alcatraz, and there's a Vietnam movement. People are burning their draft cards, and there's this young people who are rising up and challenging. It's a great time. And so in that movement, the climate movement is born. And so they begin to create, and they say that the teaching thing actually doesn't work. That name doesn't really fly too well. So they go, Earth Day. And Earth Day is created in 1970. And at the time, President Nixon, he wasn't the green president, y'all. He was this president of the country at the time, but he creates the first EPA. Why do I say that? Because there's so much going on that's intersectional at that time that it creates energy that creates change. The environmental movement, though, somehow begins in the 70s and 80s, begins to go into its silos. That's a whole other conversation. I hope in our breakout session we'll talk about that, but it does begin to become a siloed, progressive movement, literally then blocking out other entities. And it becomes an East Coast and a West Coast movement even then. So even folks who are even white people who are like from Texas and Indiana, like, well, I don't even fit in this movement either. This ain't my movement. I don't fit here. And that's what begins to carry on. I make a joke sometimes, and I say this a lot. I say it becomes like a Birkenstock movement. But I say that, and now I'm like, you know, I don't want any Chris Rock moments, so I don't want any, you know what I mean? So, you know, when anybody be like, Rev starts walking down the aisle here. I just got smacked by somebody with Birkenstocks, you know. I don't want that. That's a joke. You started asking. That's a little. Some of y'all got to catch up to that one. Come there. But the whole point here is that that's where we are, and so the job here then is that even when the environmental justice movement creates itself in Warren County, North Carolina, in the '80s, in that aspect, still doesn't come together. So, Rev, why are you saying all this to prepare us for our teaching? Why is this important for us? Because I'm going to say with you how I started. We're in a crisis. And we now have to break the silos to be successful. The science is clear. We can go through that conversation. We can talk about the transition we need to make. We can go through that conversation. But the key thing here in this conversation in regards to climate justice and environmental justice is that we will not be successful if we as humans do not come together. That means that we are on a pathway for destruction if we do not break down the silos that impact other communities. Kind of angst, because I feel like a person who pays for a kid who goes to school in Maine, so I know what it means for you to be sitting there. I know what it means to then be in this, and sometimes in this environment. My kid is in this environment, and I know how he does and what he does, and I have different kids. One plays hockey. As before anybody hockey, he probably wouldn't be here either. He's not here. I'm here. He's not here. He's up in Auburn. And so the key thing there is that we must first break down the silos in the climate movement to be successful. We must have a conversation that understands and connects the dots, so that when George Floyd or Eric Garner and they're saying, I can't breathe, we must understand that, yes, they can't breathe because of police brutality, but in reality, they can't also be because of pollution in their communities. We must connect the dots. We must connect the dots that when young people are saying that they are afraid, literally young people are saying, I don't want to have children, or I don't want to live, or I don't want to do certain things in our community, we must listen to young people. They must be leading in this conversation. They must be the ones who must bring the energy, because they're the ones who are literally saying that if it's bad right now in 2022, then 50 years from now, in 2072, when I'm just, my God, in my 70s, what does this look like at that time? That's why I'm anxious. That's why I need UNE to create curriculum and put programs together and have more teachings, because I will be dealing with this. Not just making money or going off to have a home or a house or whatever. That's good, but if my home has been washed away in the soccer somewhere, then I need to figure this thing out. The second thing, we need to change even how our movement is established. There's a crisis. So if people of color, if black and brown and indigenous people are not leading this movement, or even don't have a seat at the table, that can't be the movement that's going to bring us success. And then we must have a movement, because for so long, and this is just me, I don't want any one of these moments here, where we must have a movement that is led by women. No offense to men, but it's because of a lot of men that's why we're in the position that we're in right now. And so we need a woman leaderful movement that encourages that and breaks apart from patriarchy and breaks apart from this having this patronizing in that aspect. That's what we need to succeed. That's the movement we need. So also let me give you a few things as we move forward in this process. Because at the Hip Hop Caucus and what we've been doing is we've been trying to figure out what can also be successful. Because we don't need any more games in this process too. So one of the things that we've been speaking out, myself and Bill McKibben wrote an article about, it was right before the pandemic in 2020, asking about what we could do regarding climate finance. I'm a big climate finance person, if you know my background. I'm really big into how we can utilize and transition structures. And I'm not anti, we be very clear, I'm not somebody, I will go out and throw down out front of the building, but I'll go inside too. Because I'm a solutionary. I think that for my parents, they were revolutionary. And thank God for them at the lunch counter. And we still have lunch counter moments for our generation, but my generation, your generation, we have to be solutionary. Which means being solutionary means that we now have to figure out how to work with our enemies and work with those because we're all in this together. That's and that's different. So when my mom could just go to the lunch counter and not be served and protest and then get milk poured on them and have those black and white pictures, our generation, we can't just do that. Because even though that happens, we're still in this together. So one of the key things there is with climate finance. So I just want to just leave you with that as we begin to go to our other teachings, because it's a big deal for me. So climate finance for me has been something that how do we transition the financial structure. So we created something called Stop the Money Pipeline. And you can go to stopthemoneypipeline.com. That's your one homework. That's my one. I read to you. I read my Netflix thing. I done got excited for you. You just got one homework assignment today. That's it. You can take that one. But you go to stopthemoneypipeline.com, and it's going to list out different things that you can do here as a school, as a student, as faculty, as whatever. And one of the things there that we really have to transition our money and to funding the fossil fuel industry. One of the things that we realized when we were in Standing Rock, which was one of the largest indigenous protesters in the world a few years ago, is that the money that was still backing these industries just couldn't stop that. So we created the money pipeline, and we realized that we would be much more sophisticated in that process, is then go to become shareholders in this aspect and go there. And in that aspect, go to these different facilities and these companies so they can begin to transition their money. You've heard about the divestment campaign. We've been very successful in divestment and investment. That's very important. In getting folks to divest from fossil fuels and invest in clean energy. But now we need for the banks and the insurance and the pension funds to do the same. Because if they keep propping up the fossil fuel industry, they will keep doing what they're doing. And so at stopthemoneypipeline.com, we're really working on that for them to do that. April and May is very important because that is when shareholders meetings take place. And so we have a lot of, I'm so proud of those, I'm actually very proud of those activist shareholders who are on some of these fossil fuel boards, and they've been going in there and protesting. I mean, that takes guts in many cases. I'm proud of a lot of those who made their money from fossil fuel, like the Rockefeller family, who's now speaking out against it, and many others who are transitioning. I'm very happy about that. I'm happy for folks, from, who are former billionaires, from Tom Steyer to Mike Bloomberg, literally trying to figure out ways to use their resources to transition. It ain't all perfect, it ain't all nice, everybody ain't right, we can all read that, I get all that. But I'm saying, we gotta work together. And so that's one of the most important things we can do. So I'll leave you with this. And this is probably the thing I want you to catch. So one thing I've told you about what a movement needs to do to change. I've told you the history of this movement. I told you who I think needs to be in charge of this movement, from people of color to women, and that will bring us success. I told you how we need to break down the silos in our movement to be successful. And I told you how we need to connect the dots between racial justice, and climate justice, and other movements. This is the last thing, though. I want you to feel this. And this is the piece here. I say a lot. 100 years from now, this is really for the young people too, but everybody can get it. 100 years from now, will be 21, 22. And more than likely, none of us in this room will be here. That will be a position in this process where most of you who are young, it's hard to imagine that when you're 20 or 19 or 21. It's hard to imagine that. But more than likely, you won't live to be 120, 130 years old. Unless you found some really good drugs by that time. But more likely, maybe not. But what will be behind will be your vigor and your energy and your passion to solve this climate crisis. I don't mean to be heavy on you as we transition into our teachings, but I want to be real with you. I have done everything I can to work with folks like Beyonce, to create climate songs, to Common, to Neo. I've gone on tour with Amanda Seales and Kevin Sampson from Insecure. We've helped create a comedy climate special with comedians on comedy called Ancient Mama's Heat Wave. I'm right now in the midst of creating other documentaries with Dream Hampton, who did Surviving R. Kelly, and Wanda Sykes, and Regina Hall, and many, many others. I'm gonna do everything I can because I need for that next generation to know if they have clean air and if they have clean water that we fought. But obviously I can't do it alone, and neither can you. But this is your moment. Today is your day. Today's a day, if you haven't been as vigorous, this is your moment to do it. So I just want to thank you for already putting everything you have. I want to thank you for having the awkward conversations you may be having with your family and friends. I want to thank you for being a better student and being more disciplined, and it's even what you have to do, because we need you to be at the brightest and the best of your ability. We really do. This is your moment. If you were having a rough time this semester, use this as a wake-up call. Say, man, Rev came by and I'm ready to get it. I'm ready to get it. Use this moment. Use this day for that. Because if we fail, that means humanity fails. And we don't want that. We don't need no more wars for oil. Or wars, my goodness, because we can't put pipelines through a country. So we literally obliterate the country. That is outrageous. We need this moment. So 2022, y'all, let's get it. Let's make it happen. Thank you for having me.
Happy to take a question or two, so if anyone has anything. Please.
Well, thank you for coming today, but environmental justice and environmental protection seems like an issue heavily weighed on by young people to kind of solve the problem. So do you think there are any effective ways to bridge the gap between generations in order to develop an effective solution for the future?
Yeah, I think it goes back to my part was saying in regards to the history of the climate movement is the reason for that, that bridge you're talking about right now. And there's also that bridge within what I mentioned earlier about not understanding and connecting the dots to communities that are most impacted by environmental justice. I think that young people are because they are coming at this from an intersectional, environmental perspective, get it. And so it's not, I don't think that other older folks, so to speak, I like this, old folks, but they don't get it. Some don't get it actually, but they all don't get it, is because I think that because of how they view this issue. Now, because I'm in a lot of these meetings with older, and I'm on a numerous amount of boards, I'm on the board of the League of Conservation Voters, to the board of Methane Action, to the board of Green 2.0. I mean, there's a whole bunch of these green org boards that I'm on. A lot of times, there are a lot of people who've been in these things for quite some time, and they are mostly, I mean, what I'm saying here, maybe I'm not saying from my lens, is that they're mostly predominantly white and men. And so their lens is that they actually have a good heart to want to change, but they actually don't understand what it means to then connect the dots. So to your point, I do think that young people can understand the connection of the dots, but I also think young people, just it's kind of a little bit of a lens for you to look at it. I also don't think that they have seen the true history of environmental justice. I didn't mention in my little spiel here about Justice 40, which is very important, which is what President Biden is utilizing as a part of his environmental justice wide framework for his administration, which is, I think, is outstanding. And Justice 40 means that at least 40% of the efforts that are used to go into fixing that crisis or problem go back to that community. So there's some great things that are happening there policy-wise, but to the point you're making, I just don't think it's just their framework. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't want it. I don't think they see it as a winning framework. And environmental justice movements have been moved to what I call a kiddie table approach. And what that happens is that a lot of times you have large environmental organizations that have really focused on conservation and have focused on wildlife, which is critical to this process, but have forgot the human part about this as a way of doing it. And so that connection needs to happen. Young people get it because they're also young people. I'm sure all of you who are young people in here are being pushed from issues from Black lives to trans lives to women's rights to immigration. You're being pushed, and so your lens is different. But your lens is the correct lens. That's what I'm saying. Your lens is breaking down the silos. But just know that it's taken 50 years of creating those silos. And that's the problem why you're seeing that disconnect. I do think that what I'm hopeful for is that more investment from philanthropy is put into that. I am working with many different funders myself. I am senior advising for the Bloomberg Foundation. I'm senior advising, I'm working with, in connection with from JPB or MacArthur or whoever. I'm hopeful that, and what I'm pushing on the inside is that they are holding those who are doing this work accountable to see that environmental justice is critical, and what I said before, and they're also funding young people and young people organizations to do this work. So they're funding Zero Hour, they're funding Generation Green, they're funding Sunrise Movement, they're creating new organizations, so that lens is very important. That's kind of what I was referencing to about needing young people, needing more people of color, needing women to lead this, but also not just to lead it, but to fund them so they can do this work correctly. Thank you. Definitely.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you especially, Reverend Lennox Yearwood and James. At this point, we are moving into the part of the evening where you can go and choose your own adventure, sort of. If you are looking forward to the Taking Action panel, that will take place in 5 minutes in this room. On the first floor in room 113, if you're looking at Our Changing World, room 113, Protecting Public Health will be in room 106, which is directly below us. And the Climate and Justice panel will be in room 304, directly above us. Thank you and see you soon.
Dude.
And I don't know where to watch. 2, 3.
I'm like watching, I'm like, I could have brought up these points in Brian Hook's class. Wow.
All right. Is this thing on?
Yeah.
All right, so good evening, everybody, and welcome to UNE's one-night teach-in on climate and justice. My name is Juliana Horn, and I am a junior studying environmental studies with a minor in climate change. I'm going to be your moderator for this evening's panel discussion on taking action and the importance of finding your place among the different ways of getting involved in different outlets pertaining to climate change. Each of the panelists are going to speak for about 5 minutes on their area of expertise. After all the panelists' comments, we're going to open it up for questions and discussions with the audience. There's going to be a microphone being passed around for those asking questions, but if you don't want to use that, you can also just speak up and raise your hand. So we're going to start off with our panelists this evening. First off, we're going to have Kiara Fishkorn. She's a senior here at UNE studying marine affairs with a climate change minor, and she's presenting on youth activism. Then we have Dr. Brian Duff, associate professor of political science here at UNE. Leah Lowry, director of programs and outreach at the Climate Initiative and Kennebunkport Conservation Trust. Reverend Lennox Yearwood, which you just heard from, president and CEO of the Hip Hop Caucus. And finally, Dr. Richard Peterson, professor of environmental studies here at UNE. And we're going to kick it off with Kiara.
Hello? Hello? Oh, good? Oh, okay, there we go. The sound of my own voice. I love to hear it. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out here. And I'd also like to say thank you so much to everybody who has helped put this on. As you just heard, my name is Kiara. I am the DE&I rep on USG, and I also have the privilege of being the president of the lovely environmental club on campus, Earthseco. And on top of all of that, I am also a pretty outspoken environmental advocate. I believe that youth activism does not have to have one singular definition. Activism can be simply picking up a piece of trash off the beach. It could be calling and writing to your local representatives. It could just be being that person who's always bringing up the prevalent issues in class. And because there doesn't have to be a fluid or singular definition to activism, anyone can be it, really. You know, at its root, activism is about that spurring collective, that wanting to make this world a better place than which you came in. And when you think about it specifically with climate change, youth activism is at the forefront of the climate justice movement because it is the only thing we have ever known. We were born into this climate crisis, and we're going to be the ones inheriting all of the problems that come with it. I mean, you think of Hurricane Katrina. You look at all the hurricanes that are growing in intensity. You think of the wildfires that are growing across the country, that are decimating entire towns in California. And when you think about how Texas froze overnight, these prevalent natural disasters are stuff that we are going to have to face and we're going to have to solve the problem of. So that is why it's the youth leaders who are leading this climate crisis and this climate justice movement. And it's just so incredible and inspiring to see how many young activists are coming out of the climate justice movement. And through my 5 minutes here, I kind of wanted to talk about a few of them. One of the most incredible examples and compelling examples of youth activism within the climate justice movement is the Juliana versus United States federal court case. If you haven't looked into this, I definitely recommend looking it up on YouTube. In 2015, 21 youth activists, literally children in elementary school who should be on the playground, sued the federal government, the executive branch, and the President of the United States of America for failing to provide a stable climate for us to grow up in. Like, I just cannot imagine the audacity that they had to do this, but they did it. They sued the President of the United States for failing to provide a stable climate, saying that with ignoring that carbon emissions were going to increase this climate crisis, they have violated our constitutional right of life and liberty to live on a planet that is free from a climate crisis. This court case is still being decided on in the federal courts, but even with that, it has already inspired so many other children across this country to demand accountability and have already started to sue state and federal governments, demanding that they have a livable future. I am just always in awe of how so many young people all across the nation are becoming more and more active regarding speaking in the climate crisis. One of my favorite examples that I really want everybody to know about is a young girl named Mari Copeny, otherwise known as Little Miss Flint. Flint, Michigan really is, in my opinion, the centerpiece of environmental racism that is being exacerbated with the climate crisis. At just 8 years old, Mari Copeny noticed how the water in her town of Flint, Michigan was decimating communities and lives, how the lead in the water was just creating a massive health crisis, spreading sickness. And because nothing was being done, the news wasn't covering this, she just decided to go right to the top. And as a third grader, she wrote a letter directly to President Obama saying, "Why aren't you paying attention to the people of Flint, Michigan?" And it sure got his attention, and it got attention of everybody else in the country. And for a week, that was the only thing you could see on CNN or any of the news outlets, that this young 8-year-old girl was demanding why the President of the United States was ignoring the people of Flint, Michigan. A few years later, with her advocacy, she already raised more than $250,000 to provide free water to the people of Flint when the federal government wasn't doing so. Her, as an advocate, as a young advocate, was so influential that millions upon millions of people are still donating to help with the infrastructure to get lead out of the water in Flint, Michigan. This is just such an incredible example of what we are capable of, what we as the youth can do in this climate crisis that seems to be growing worse every single day. You know, and we just have so much power when we come as numbers. Some of the biggest strikes in America have been formed by just one person saying, "I want to make a difference in this world." And it seems that in our generation, because we have grown up fighting and fighting for more and more causes, that it's always been that one youth person, that one young adult, that one elementary schooler saying, "Enough is enough and I want change." And we can instill that in ourselves in our lives, and it's just doing something small every single day. You know, to be an advocate doesn't have to mean you have to just DM, Biden on Instagram being like, "Hey, I want this to change." It could just be something as being that person who's always bringing up the issues in our classrooms. It could be just being that person on this campus who is mindful and trying to spread awareness about issues that you feel is important. But youth activism will always be the center stage of every single movement that you are passionate about, and I implore you to get more involved. Thank you.
I'm going to see if this works. Kiara's a hard act to follow. It was a good talk without notes. Okay, so I'm going to use my time to talk about, Kiara reminded us of how many people there are out there who are showing incredible initiative and creativity and energy and bravery. And this is for the group who just it's not me right now. I'm not, and it feels like a leap, to actually just get started, to start creating one of these stories that people will tell. So, when it comes to climate change, a lot of the problems are, technical, scientific. The solutions are almost always political. They're almost always political on several levels, but government policies is a big part of it. And it's why political participation and organization is so important. First things first, you have to vote. Every time, no excuse ever to not vote. Bring a friend. If you don't know who to vote for, do your best. That's what most people do. This is the purple bar is the youth vote. That was actually 2016. It got better in 2020. It got to 50%. The map to the right is what the electoral map would look like if those bars were reversed, if the young people were voting the most and older people the least. So it makes a huge difference, especially if young people just make it a habit, a duty, do it, and make sure your friends feel the same way. Okay, public action, right? That's, this is how politics happens. And, there is this thing that political scientists have noticed, which is there is something magical when you get together in a group. When you are face to face with people and you start talking about a problem, it transforms you, it transforms the other people in the group, it makes things possible that weren't possible before. It's just fundamental to politics. And so, one thing you can do is join a group that's already doing this stuff. Everyone else on this panel has a group. Join one of their groups, right? You know, the environmental group on campus, the climate initiative in Kennebunk, Hip Hop Caucus. Find one that sounds good to you and show up, and you'll be amazed. You'll end up running a subgroup and getting things done. That's one way to go. I highly recommend it. Another strategy, and one that I think is underutilized and has incredible potential, and is the more common way that politics happens, is get in a group about something else that you're into. Maybe you're into public health and you want to, do public health service. Maybe you're into athletics. The most classic example is people who belong to churches, and they have like kind of church groups. Subgroups in the churches or the community. Get involved in a group, and then once you're there, start bringing up the climate crisis, political action, and just get the group's energy moving in that direction. And that is actually the most common thing that has changed things in American politics. That's what I recommend. So you might already be on an athletic team, you might be already in some other group. Take advantage of that energy that's already happening. Okay, it happens all the time. Here's a disturbing example from a recent book that I loved. So in North Carolina, the KKK, they're mostly interested in white supremacy, but they're having trouble recruiting people. So they were like, oh, what do people care about? Oh, the opioid crisis. So they're going door to door, and they're genuinely connecting people whose families have been devastated by the opioid crisis to services, right? So they're like a public health group now. And then once they've got you, like, and they're like, oh, how about the white supremacist stuff? And they're building power. They are building power. And they're doing it by having a group and having conversations about, like, what can we do to, like, get people on board? And it's working down there, right? It's disturbing, but it works. And, it's okay, here's another example in Ukraine, right? There's a lot of groups taking action in Ukraine. They were not about self-defense against Russia 2 months ago, okay? The group on the right is literally like a ladies' sewing club, and now they're sewing flak jackets for people who are out on the front lines, right? It's like these groups, they were pre-existing, they knew each other, they respected each other, they knew each other's energy, and then once you have that, you can turn it in the directions you need to turn it. You know what I mean? And then finally, it does go full circle because group membership is one of the #1 predictors of whether you vote. All right, and then the last thing I'll say, I don't think I have another slide. Oh, there's one missing. Anything, it does make you feel better. Like it makes you less lonely and anxious. And finally, anything you do in public, it invites a group to form, right? And so if you're having trouble finding a group, or it's just do something in public and see what happens. Okay, thanks.
So my name is Leah Lowry, and I work for the Climate Initiative as well as the Kennebunkport Conservation Trust. And some of you may be familiar with the Gulf of Maine Field Studies class, and I'm totally going to call her out because she's sitting in the back. But I co-created that with Dr. Pam Morgan and a wonderful science teacher in the high school locally. And part of how we really feel getting youth engaged in a meaningful way is through local action. So we saw in the very beginning, the video that happened, I actually got very teary with the kids who were on the screen saying, I am angry, I'm hopeless, I'm sad, I'm scared, and that's what we hear. Because you're looking at a world around you that is falling apart. And it's not just falling apart with the climate. There are so many issues. And that is the link between social justice and climate change. And those issues are connected. So it's not surprising that you guys are frustrated and angry. And you hear it when people say this entire this entire fight, the mantle is being put on our shoulders to solve it, because we are the ones who are going to have to deal with it the longest, and y'all have done nothing. We haven't done nothing. It's muddy, it's complicated, but we do need you. And I'm going to talk about a few ways that I think that youth can really gain power and empower their voices to create change. Some of the things that we recognize is that this is a global issue. Y'all are hearing stories every single day. I don't know whether it's a blessing or a curse that you guys have news at your fingertips any hour, any second, and it's global. You know what's happening not just next door to you, but in the next country, in the next, in the next continent. So you guys are hearing and dealing with so much more, and it makes it overwhelming. So what we encourage you to do is look at the land beneath your feet. That's what you know, that's what you love, that's what you care about, and that's where you can actually make change. You do have control over the land beneath your feet on some level. It's really hard to look at the icebergs the size of New York falling off and feeling like you have any agency in that or any ability to change that. That's where the hopelessness comes in. But when you start looking at your local community and ways to get involved there, you have a chance to make a difference. And so some of the things that we have done is getting students involved in collecting data, acknowledging those huge global issues that are facing the world and how they're affecting your community. How are they affecting the campus right here at UNE that you guys walk on every single day? You have a marsh that's falling into the water. We have invasive species. We have warmer weather than we've ever had before. There are things that are happening here that you can get involved in and take, whether it's scientific data or whether it's social data, whatever it is, get involved in understanding how climate change is affecting your local community. That's where you have agency right here and feel like you can change and make a difference. And your voice is powerful. So what we're finding is we have students that are working on these local issues, and they're frustrated and they're angry, and then we start talking about looking at these issues from multiple lenses. So it's not just the ecological lens. When we're in school, we separate out all of these subjects, right? You learn about economic issues, you learn about scientific issues, you learn about social issues, then you learn about environmental issues. And rarely do we make the connection between all of them. But what I invite you to do is get involved in the local issues facing your community that deal with climate change and start looking at them through those three lenses. Yes, these are environmental issues, but who are they affecting in the sociocultural realm? If you're from this area, there are 6 generations of fishermen that their kids aren't going to be taking that business over. They have to find a new way of life. Not just an economic impact to that family, but actually it's a cultural impact to that family. How are we affecting the economy of the area through climate change, right? Like a lot of people look at these big houses on the ocean and they're like, well, that's their problem. They're wealthy enough, they can deal with it. That house falls into the ocean, that is our problem. That's a tax burden laid onto the people who can't afford to pay those taxes, right? That is an environmental issue. So really being able to look at the issues that are facing your locality, not just global. What's happening in your yard, where you stand? Look at them. Look at how muddy they are. They are messy. And how do we find those sustainable solutions? By looking at all of the issues, bringing everyone to the table. You all are powerful voices. And one of the last things that we've really looked at is using youth voices to be an agent of change in a conversation. Catherine Hayhoe often talks about, all we got to do is start talking about it, like none of us talk about it. So take the knowledge you're gaining about your community, what's happening in the land underneath your feet, and start a conversation. If I walk into a room and people know I work for a conservation trust and a climate organization and I'm who I am and what I look like, people will automatically assume what I think, what I vote, how I feel, what I believe. The minute I walk into a room, and it can shut down the conversation before I even open my mouth. The beautiful thing about the stage of life that you're in is that generally isn't the case. So what we're finding is that when we invite you all and your voices to start a conversation with community members who are different than you, who are older, who look different, sound different, may not live in the same experience as you do, it lowers the barrier to start that conversation. It's a powerful, powerful opportunity for you to have. And that's what the Climate Initiative and the Gulf of Maine Field Studies, both, that's what we're trying to do, is empower your voice to engage in climate action and inspire grassroots movements in your locality. Because by inspiring local action and pulling all the voices to the table, build the table yourselves with that community that you're trying to engage the conversation, that's where you guys will start to inspire that movement. People understand and save the things that they care about and they see and they're connected to, and that's where your local environment is actually a really great place to start. It's beyond just recycling. It's actually being able to talk about that conversation with everybody in your community and why it's going to make a difference. Why is that marsh falling into the river going to make a difference to this campus? Start that conversation, and you'll be amazed at how far it goes. Adults will listen. Sometimes we don't listen to each other. Most of the time we don't listen to each other. But you all have an amazing ability and a superpower, really, to be able to start these hard conversations that can inspire a movement. And so that's what I encourage you to do. Look in your local landscape. Understand what you know. Go for the things you love. Start understanding climate change and social justice in your community and how those are affecting the livelihoods and the lives of the people who live around you and with you, and start that conversation. Because it's not going to work until we bring everyone to the table to have this conversation, and until people understand how it's working in where they live and the things that they care about. So that's my shtick.
No, I don't need that. Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I give you something to put on the screen? Did you do that, or did you do that up there? Can you, I could, if you get my phone, you can email it to yourself.
Okay.
No, this is a video.
Oh, okay.
I want to share. Just email it to yourself. So.
Yep.
So, how long would it take you? I can pass the mic. How long would it take you? Like 2 minutes or 1 minute?
About 5 seconds.
Okay, there you go. Right. Well, in that case, 30 seconds. Get it then. You just heard me. I'm Rev Yearwood, President of the Hip Hop Caucus. I'm really honored to be here with everybody on the panel, especially my sister at the end, proud to the people. And that's my goal. My goal is having more young people or more women leading this movement. So I'm excited always when I see that. I think that there should be a panel of just them, to be honest, and young people. So I actually want to use my time to show you a clip of a documentary that we're working on. I kind of mentioned it, but since you're here in this panel, you get an extra, because you get like the thing. So this is actually a documentary that we're finishing up. It's called Underwater Projects. It's being done by Dream Hampton. My goal is to get other people like Ava and Dream and there's so many people who are in Hollywood who are amazing storytellers to be doing this work. Dream Hampton did Surviving R. Kelly. And so she actually is doing this piece here. And Underwater Projects is a documentary. It's about, it looks at how climate affects public housing. And so, and looks at how a lot of communities, which was in New Orleans and other places, and so in that aspect, what it looks at is Norfolk, Virginia. Norfolk, Virginia is very similar to, awesome, thank you. is very similar to New Orleans because below sea level, has a high level of poverty. It's really only one way in, one way out. So if a Category 2 or 3 storm hit Norfolk, it would have more destruction than it actually happened in New Orleans. And then they're using climate change in the city to create climate gentrification. So those are some of the issues that we had to deal with in this conversation. So it's much deeper than that. So I wanted to show you this little clip that is being done. So that's one thing. And then also, because that'll be my whole time there, just make sure to check out my podcast. It's called The Coolest Show. It's at thecoolestshow.com. Super dope. It really focuses on particularly a BIPOC, Black, Brown, Indigenous women and women of color leaderful movement. So I just interview predominantly people who look like that. And it really talks about climate liberation and what it means for that standpoint. So check out The Coolest Show. We actually come back on for the 4th season on April 4th, so which is next Monday. So those are my 2 things. And when you're ready, yeah, crank the volume up and they can, this is our documentary. I am originally from Louisiana. All right, now, I like that. When Katrina hit New Orleans, 1,833 people lost their lives. Now, if you can go to a place that if they were hit by a Category 1 storm, it would have more disastrous effects. I said, well, where is that place? I'll be there. They said the Hampton Roads, Norfolk area.
A rock from space slammed into what is now Virginia, and besides really ruining the days of a couple of dinosaurs, it also left an intense crater, which made the water around what is now Norfolk deep.
That's my beach right there, and the 2 lakes on the side and my pool in the back.
The main ways out of the area in an emergency funnel to a set of just a few tunnels and bridges.
There's probably not another locality that's facing the challenges and the threats around water.
I'm not trying to see my area on the news talking about body counts and we can't find this person, we can't find these people.
The naval base in Norfolk equates for the largest percentage of any industry. There's also the Langley Air Force Base, NASA.
But all this military infrastructure is going underwater. The government must be working on fixing this show, right? No, my friends.
It's not $2 billion or $20 billion, as you said. It's $100 trillion.
Because the flood wall stops where the public housing area begins.
St. Paul's, like many public housing communities around the country, is more prone to climate flooding than the rest of the city, further complicating the question of what to do about public housing and families who need housing support.
So you're looking at multiple billions of dollars to try to build a living with water situation.
You've got to rebuild it back in a way that lives with the water.
So they offer Section 8 vouchers and things like that to get people to move other places.
People are running out of places to go.
Hold up, how are we the ones being hurt the worst by a climate crisis that we contribute to the least?
We used to mainly smell car fumes, and we didn't smell them anymore because we were growing things.
You spend your life trying to transform it so that privileged people can then just push you right out? My God.
It's a long process. Like you say, it takes a whole village.
We understand that this is an issue that affects us more than everybody else.
Climate justice and environmental justice, all of it is centered on racial justice.
We don't have any other choice but to figure this out for our future.
Yes, you're in harm's way, but yes, you can be the solution to the rest of the country and the world to fix this climate crisis. There you go. Thank you so much.
We'll wait till we can get some more slides back up there in just a minute. But thank you, Norfolk. Yeah, it's the next Katrina. It's really at the center right now.
Sorry, 1 second.
No problem.
There we go. Okay, let me close that so we don't hear that anymore.
And next slide. Thank you.
Yeah. So, well, thank you all for being here. My name is Rick Peterson. I'm a professor of environmental studies here at UNE. Start right out with this. To one who doubts the worth of doing anything if you can't do everything. You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They never will prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in the balance. I don't think that I ever thought they would, but I'm prejudiced beyond debate in favor of my right to choose which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight. Where to put the stubborn ounces of our weight? The opportunities are endless, as we've heard here, and often they can overwhelm. The poet urges us to claim the right to choose who gets to feel our weight and to never let go of that right. Oops. Our weight as individuals matters. Drops in the bucket? Francis Moore LePay reminds us that being a drop in the bucket is magnificent. The problem is we cannot see the bucket. Our work is helping people, this is what you're doing, helping people see that there is a bucket. There are all these people all over the world who are creating this bucket of hope. And so our drops are incredibly significant. Now, individual actions are clearly part of the solutions puzzle. One individual locus to feel our weight that has been making news of late is to take the pledge. Oops, I guess it's missing. There it is. Maybe you've seen this. The pledge is committing ourselves to ask the question, very simple question, before every single decision and every action, large or small, will this take us toward or move us away from the use of fossil fuels? And yet, moving off of fossil fuels to adopt renewable energy by itself is meaningless if those systems are harnessed to the same ethos and value system that's based on relentless increasing of economic growth and the belief that unlimited material increase is the basis of the good life. Scientist, policymaker, presidential advisor, dean, and author Gus Speth writes, I used to think that top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. Perhaps our first step of taking action as individuals is to feel our weight, taking stock of our deepest sense of what really matters, what is really important. What do we truly value? What truly gives our lives meaning? And perhaps we'll find with Thoreau that, quote, we are rich in proportion to the number of things we can afford to let alone. Jim Rice reminds us, though, that the problem is also structurally intentional in terms of cause, and therefore solutions must also be intentionally structural. And so we need to also act collectively, to pool the stubborn ounces of our weight with those of others, to join in that long-standing practice and potentiality known as social movements, which throughout history have wielded their power to bring about social change. And a key part of social movements are social change organizations. And there are so many of them wielding their weight right now, this very moment, all over the globe. So much is happening. much more than any one of us is conscious of, in part because we simply have not heard about the many thousands of organizations quietly and not so quietly doing their thing all over the world right now. There are so many options for getting involved, as my fellow panelists have showed us. I want to just highlight a few because they cover the gamut in terms of what stage each of us is at along the journey of our lives. For the youth, you all have already heard likely of the Maine Youth for Climate Justice, doing amazing work right here in the state of Maine. The Sunrise Movement, a little bit larger, more regional, going global, and of course Fridays for Future that Greta started. All three of those were started by women. Climate Justice, the Climate Justice Alliance, Earth Justice has been already mentioned. I love their motto, because the earth needs a good lawyer. And in the Indigenous community, the Indigenous Environmental Network is doing amazing work. And for those of us who are 60-something or beyond, raise your hand if you're 60-something and beyond, because we're part of the solution too. We need to be solutionaries. We can't just tell the young people that this is you guys are going to fix it. No. Third Act, recently created by Bill McKibben, Jane Fonda, and Bernie Sanders, is saying it's our turn in our third act to do something. And we have money, we have resources now. We've got some knowledge, maybe a little bit of wisdom. We can't shove it off to the young people. Third Act is doing some amazing things for the 60-something generation. Citizens Climate Lobby, very deeply involved in the political process and lobbying. And I really like this one, Elders Climate Action, as the hair on my head starts to disappear. That there are some elders that may be a little older than me that I can also learn from. May each of us feel and assert the stubborn ounces of our weight. Thank you.
All right, guys. So thank you for your comments and expertise in this area on this panel. So we're going to open it up for questions, comments, all that stuff. Feel free to address your questions to the entire panel or one particular person or the audience in general. We have a mic going around for anybody who's interested.
It is. Okay. So let me try and figure out how to ask this. So to use a rhetorical example, if my uncle who watches too much Fox News gets his news stories from Facebook, the way to sort of bring him around would be compassion, empathy, and patience. But so that's not a problem that's a problem I know how to solve. But what do you do about the really bad people, like Reverend? I believe you mentioned the people in the wake of Katrina, the big business owners who are sowing climate denial. What do you do about that sort of evil?
Want to take that?
Oh, no, you can take that.
So the reality is that's a great question, and that's where politics does come into play, and policy is critical. One of the things that we say at the caucus, which we call Hip Hop Caucus, the caucus, is we say that either you shape policy or policy will shape you. So there's a need to understand that there are those who are the moral argument, the scientific argument will not work. And so you literally have to, in some cases, just shut it down. And so I was glad to hear Gus Spett's name mentioned. Me and Gus actually were arrested outside of the White House. And so it was just, there are times, and please know I don't like to get arrested outside the White House, but you have to sometimes put your body against the gears of the machine to bring it to a halt. Sometimes that also doesn't work, And so this is why I mentioned earlier with the shareholder, literally from the inside out strategy, literally going inside to these corporations in many cases, and in essence, in some cases, taking them over and creating that. But the reality to your question is that there are those who, that question, there are those who are going to be hell-bent on their greed. There are going to be those who are hell-bent do a number of things that, unfortunately, that is the battle. There is the battle in which you have to then change that. So, anybody else want to chime in?
I'll say quick. Yeah, I mean, politics is a contest. It's a fight, and you just have to out-organize, out-hustle, be creative, fight dirty occasionally, and that's the way it goes.
I also think bringing more people to the table. So right now, you talked a lot about we're in our silos and all, and I think the environmental movement is a perfect example of that. There's a lot of people who have the same idea, are going about it a little bit differently, and aren't necessarily breaking that silo down to bring everyone to the table. And the larger that group is, the more powerful it can be in out hustling, as you would say.
Behind you.
Yeah. Hello. I've got a question for you, Reverend Lennox. So you've worked with documentaries, making music, making podcasts for kind of in service of aiding the climate in the future. Why do you think media is such a strong vector for changing minds, and how do you use that in your personal experience? Like, is there kind of a design ethos you're going for?
Yeah. Well, I believe that it was once said that he who controls the media controls the masses. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and the guilty innocent. And so media is powerful. When I did my little thing for Netflix, one of the things I used in there was that the two reporters got it. That actually was the change. That there was that when those two characters said the "don't look up" process, that other media around the world, actually without that as a key component, then the kids who were in Flint, who were pranking and moving people's cars with the little radioactive to actually end up moving the comet, then it wouldn't have happened if the media was not instrumental. I think that media and storytelling and narrative organizing is critical to this process. It actually goes to the tail end to the last question, because I do think that there's a need to tell the story in different ways for different people. The trailer I just showed everybody for underwater projects was, if you noticed, if you're from a climate perspective, it was 99% people of color. That is not by mistake, right? Because then, and also it's not forced. Everybody in that story wasn't the victim. It wasn't like people of color were only the people who were, it was everybody. You had the mayor, you had the activists, you had those who were affected by Section 8 housing, you had the community leaders, you had just the women talking about this is my lake, this is my sea. You had all those things going on, and it wasn't isolating because you had people who were white in the trailer, but it was just important that if you're black, to be honest, and you're brown or you're red, when you see that, then that becomes, that media, that representation, you then say, oh, this is my issue too. And so the thing about that, and so that's very, very important. So media has the ability to shape the story. And I think that what we see, there is something now that's been put out there where media has that aspect. So I'll stop. That's my little card up here. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and ask my question. So Rick, you pointed out that the youth climate movement, most of the leaders are women. And Reverend, you also mentioned you think women should be in the lead. You're also, all of us, I think, are in agreement that we need to bring everyone to the table. But I'd love to hear from anyone up there if you think it would be good to have women in the lead, and if so, why?
Okay, let me think of all the environmental classes I've had as a senior. So when we look at the climate crisis movement, it is predominantly Black and Indigenous communities that are facing the effects of climate change the most. We know that. But within those communities, it is women in the Black and Indigenous communities that are facing it even more. So to have women understanding their perspective in the climate justice movement, being able to be in a position of power where they can say what action should go where, what should we do to figure out this issue? How can we go about solving this crisis? How can we go about solving this issue in an equitable way where everybody is involved? I think that is why we need to have women in power more, because that demographic is the most at risk against the climate crisis. Yeah.
I do want to add one reason why I say that, and this is very important. So I think that a lot of times we forget that many folks who come from certain communities, not necessarily just white communities, but usually sometimes upper middle class communities, and particularly when you're from this neck of the woods in New England, you're from Vermont, you're from, obviously Maine, Massachusetts, and then you go to California, Oregon, so forth, so on. The thing is that a lot of times people forget that they grew up being an environmentalist from a traditional standpoint. And they grew up thinking that it was, what it meant to be taken to the woods in that aspect. What happens there, that other communities are also being environmentalists, maybe differently. And so the community I came from, my mama might not have been a, quote, environmentalist or a conservationist, but she would have said, put that towel by the front door, it's a draft coming in. Or she'd have said, put the plastic on the windows, we got to keep this utility bill low. And that might have been the traditional way. Or my uncle might have said, we're going out to the woods to go fish, and we're going to do certain things. That wasn't coined in that way. We have to understand that when I say that, is that we have a movement that has been predominantly male, that is running a movement, and then it isolates predominantly people of color and women. And what I'm saying is that I'm not trying to get rid of anybody. I'm not trying to replace anybody. But I'm saying that we're missing the genius of other people to solve the crisis. As a matter of fact, I actually think that we also are very too academy driven. I actually think that we need to have very much a Fannie Lou Hamer type of movement, where we're finding a genius outside the academy, someone who can say, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that kind of energy, that kind of passion that to be honest, gets diluted in these hallways, because you begin to think about your curriculum and your thesis and your career. You're not out there in those streets. And so, but we need both the streets and the suites. And so when I say that, it's not just, I want you to understand, I'm not just saying that just to say, because I think it's a nice novelty and it's a nice response. I really believe that women who are leading in this movement, people of color, are the solution to the crisis. We're missing that voice at the table. And so that's the thing. And I also think that now, keeping it 100, I think that sometimes the opposite also happens, that we're now creating a youth movement. I actually am not a fan of youth. I like young people because I like leaders. And I believe that young people should be leading as well, because they have a 21st century model that others don't have. They can use social media in ways, and TikTok and Instagram, and they can connect with their global citizens, and so they can connect differently. And so because of that, we need that leader to be in there. My team, Hip Hop Caucus, and please, anybody wants to be an intern or wants to work, we hire, and we got jobs, good nine. We're based in LA and DC primarily, but you could be anywhere really. But I say that, we have folks there. Hip Hop Caucus itself, as an organization, turns 18. We have people there who were 2 and 1 when the organization was created, but are leading. My producer of the coolest show is Destiny. She has her own organization called Generation Green. Destiny Hodges, you should look her up if you see her. She is a black woman who does with liberation, environmental liberation, and so she's centered in blackness and black futurism, but in that process, she's the producer of the coolest show. She's literally the one who tells me how to, so when you see the guest, she's the one leading on that. And not no kind of kiddie table standpoint, but really leading really coming in there. So when I say that, I'm looking for leaders, but I'm also looking for people who are willing to lay it on the line. And I think that sometimes we just need that. So I just wanted to add that. I didn't want you to get this sense that it was just, I'm just saying that. And I think that what was said earlier, which was very important, is that I honestly think people in the climate movement don't even know and Leah Thomas just wrote her book, you should get that book, Intersectional Environmentalist, amazing book that just came out. What I'm saying, that I think our movement doesn't even know what it looks like to have a diverse movement. And that's hurting us. So.
All right. Shout out to Pam's Women in the Environment class for me knowing the answer to that question. But we're at the end of the hour, so I'm just going to thank all of our panelists here and everybody who asked questions. Really thank you guys for coming out. And for the next panels, if you want to go to one of those, in a couple of minutes in this room is going to be Navigating Climate Anxiety. For those that you want to go to Communicating Climate Change, that will be in room 106 downstairs, and then upstairs Solutions for Future in 304. Thanks everybody for coming.
Good evening and welcome to UNE's One Night Teach-In on Climate and Justice. My name is Devin Aparicio and I'm a senior health, wellness, and occupational studies major with a minor in psychology here at the University of New England. I will be your moderator for this evening's panel on navigating climate anxiety. During this session, each of the panelists will speak for about 5 minutes. After all of our panelists' comments, we will open up for questions and discussion with the audience for the remainder of the session. Our panelists this evening are distinguished faculty here at the University of New England. To begin, we have Jan Froelich, Associate Professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy, Cindy Amato, Associate Clinical Professor in the School of Social Work, Hillary A. Powell, Assistant Professor of Psychology, Selma Holden, Assistant Clinical Professor in the College of Osteopathic Medicine, and Erin Neptune, Health and Wellness Educator. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I will hand it over to our first panelist, Jan Froelich, to begin.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk about moving forward with listening exchanges. It's really tough to face the realities of climate change, climate injustice, and it can bring up a whole bunch of feelings. Particularly, as our introducer said, anxiety can be a huge factor for us, but discouragement can also be a huge factor. And I'm going to talk about a particular tool for battling with discouragement, anxiety, fears, any of the feelings that come up related to climate justice. And I thought we would start, one tool is to put our attention on what we love and appreciate about nature. And I don't think this poll everywhere slide, we had trouble. Poll everywhere doesn't like working with multiple slides, so I don't think it's going to come up. But just take a moment and think about a place that you cherish in nature, or anything in nature at all that you cherish. Hold that in your mind for a moment, because just always keeping that on the forefront of our minds helps us go forward in addressing climate grief, climate anxiety, climate discouragement.
I see trees, ocean, and water.
Oh, it is?
Here, but not up there.
Oh, but not on there. Okay. All right, well, let's move forward to the next slide. Okay, I have practiced something called listening exchanges for a number of years and found that this is immensely helpful for dealing with the discouragement and all the feelings that come up around climate. And what's helpful is we get to find connection with another person. We get to vent the discouragement, the grief, and the fear with others, and find hope in moving forward. So I want to give us a chance to try this out. I'm going to set a timer on my phone for about 2 minutes each, and I want you to, with somebody nearby you, take an opportunity to take turns listening to each other and have a chance to vent. This will be confidential sharing, so you won't share with anybody else what your partner shares. And I've got a couple of other pointers on this. Whoops. Actually, something's a little missing, but that's, oh, it looks like one slide might be missing. We want you to pay full attention. Don't give your partner any advice. Show your caring, and we'll try to make sure this is shared equal time that you're sharing. So would everybody find a partner in the room? And if there are 3 of you, that's fine as well. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes each, so you can take turns listening to one another for 2 minutes each. And if we have triads, you'll have to time for yourself for about 1 minute each. And take a chance to talk about both what's frustrating, any feelings of discouragement that comes up, and also what brings you hope in dealing with climate justice. Okay, you can figure out who's going to talk first, who's going to listen first, and you can begin. You and I can talk. All righty. Thank you so much. So that was a quick exposure to using listening exchanges. We vent together, we connect, and we can go forward. We get more energy. The more we connect, the more we vent, we clear our mind, and we go forward. Our next panelist.
Goodness. So after all of that, I get to depress you all again. I knew this was going to happen. When Jan was telling us what she was going to do, I said, and then they're going to hand it to me, and I'm going to talk about injustice and marginalization and oppression. So I apologize in advance, but it's so very, very, very important. To understand, I don't have any slides.
Oh, just your name?
No, just my name, Cindy Amato. I am in the School of Social Work, and I'm the director of the Bachelor's of Social Work program. So I'm going to come at it from a social work perspective, which I think sometimes is misunderstood or not known. Is sort of what do social workers do and what do they base their work on? I think we have a lot of different ideas in our heads of what that is. But one of the things is we have values that we help us make decisions and understand the world around us. And I'm just, two of them that I think are most relevant to the conversation tonight is social justice and dignity and worth of the person. And those are things that we carry with us when we think about what's going on. The other piece about social work is that we employ the principle of person and environment. And a lot of times I think people think about person and environment and they think of it from the standpoint of where they live or who their family members are or their friends or some of those more human aspects. So the other pieces that we look at too are sort of the economic, the political, how do political decision-making affect people's lives and their ability to have well-being, their family, but also one of the things that is really important is the natural world that we're part of. And I think one thing that Reverend Yearwood really, really touched upon is how marginalized people are really bearing the brunt of climate change in a lot of different ways. We're dumping hazardous materials near poor people and people of color. We're taking land away from indigenous people or wanting to put pipelines through it. I mean, there's a lot of different things that are just for somebody's culture. So from a social work lens, of course, we have a stake in addressing it. That's what our call to action is to be a call to action for social justice for everyone and to find those things that are creating barriers for people to have equal access to all the things that make our lives really wonderful. And if we're taking away their environments, if we're taking away their ability to have good health, then that is an injustice that we see. So because this talk is more on navigating climate anxiety, one of the things that I ended up doing is I decided to look a little bit more in about like the mental health implications of climate change, and there are a lot of them, needless to say. I think we all experience them, but to put it into context, part of that mental health is not just mental illness, mental disorders, or behavioral disorders, or any of that. I found this to be really, really interesting to think about it more holistically of what are we working towards, and maybe this is the more hopeful piece of what I'm going to talk about, and that is to think of mental health as a state of mental wellness, of emotional resilience, and of psychosocial well-being. So if we know what we're working towards, then those are our goals, and that's what we want for everybody. And we have had policies and people and systems and oppression that have limited people's ability to have social well-being. So anyway, so that is sort of in the context of that. So I found some of this really interesting information that I just wanted to share with you, just for you to keep in your cap, and I hope that maybe you'll want to look into it a little bit more. But when climate isn't part of the equation of how we understand health inequities, then there's no way to really understand how it's impacting people, and especially marginalized people. So we have to really add that to the dialogue. I know that there have been other panels that are talking about social determinants of health, but a lot of times mental health is not included in that. And really what ends up happening is nobody talks about mental health. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the choir now, because I think all of us in this room know that mental health is a really huge impact in all of our lives, and we have to talk about it and address it. And the other thing to think about it, and this is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to be able to specifically link mental health outcomes to climate change, it's because mental health outcomes have huge root causes, and they just don't happen overnight. So you think about those people who are more marginalized, they're going to be starting at a different starting line than somebody else. They've been pushed back. And so when climate change is on that, you're going to see that the mental health consequences are going to be sort of accelerated by climate change, just as it is for all of us. So something just to think about of how it's really affecting other people. And when I talk about like marginalized folks, just some general areas to think about is like socioeconomic status. So we were talking about poverty before. We were talking about culture. So there are different cultures that we don't respect that, and the environment is affecting their cultures and their way of life and their mental health. Gender, we can see, where do women work compared to men? Are women at the table to be able to even have their voice heard about what climate change means to them and the future that they want to see? Race is a huge piece of it. And we can go on and on and on about race, and I think that was really pinpointed in the opening talk. And then there's the pre-existing health conditions. So you can think about, there are people who have been marginalized their entire lives. Their health is affected by that, and now climate on top of that is really going to be decreasing their life as well. So those are the things that I kind of think about, and that's why we're feeling anxiety. All of this is happening, so it's real, and I think we have to say that it's real. So some of the impact that we see specifically, and I don't know if I'm at 5 minutes. Am I at 5 minutes? Yep. I am? Okay. So I will just say, please be hopeful. Have your call to action and do exactly what everybody says. It's all of us who have to stand up, and we have to be awkward and uncomfortable, and we have to say the things that have to be said to the people who have been making the rules for us right along, and the rules are wrong. Just so you know, the rules are wrong, so we need to change them.
Thank you, Cindy. And I will take the clicker for my part. Sure. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. And I'm going to kind of pick up where Cindy left off, because I'm going to talk about a specific area of mental health impact when we're thinking about climate change, and that's going to be trauma. So my name, by the way, is Dr. Hilary Powell. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work here at the university, but I also work in the community as a psychotherapist. And so one of the areas I see climate change coming up in that work has to do with conceptualizing natural disasters as trauma. Now, this is important because, of course, with climate change, we're seeing an increasing number of these extreme climate events. With that, we're seeing an increase in experienced trauma. So we can understand natural disasters as what I might call a criterion A trauma, which is a term to refer to specific types of traumatic experiences that really serve as a prerequisite for developing PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, if we look at the general population, we know that about half of the population of the United States will experience a trauma in their lifetime. And amongst that half, about 7% will go on to develop PTSD. When we look at natural disasters in particular, we see a range of PTSD resulting from these trauma exposures. So from about 7%, kind of that general population number, all the way up to 24%. That 24% particularly happens for those folks who are first responders and also those folks living at the epicenter of the natural disaster, at the center of that damage. Now, it's important to note that PTSD is an important consequence when we're thinking about natural disasters and climate change, but certainly not everyone who experiences a trauma develops PTSD. Regardless, it's still traumatic stress, and that has an impact on your health and well-being. And that's not even talking about the indirect mental health impacts of natural disasters. So things like poverty and bereavement, missing your home, missing loved ones, missing the communities that you've been a part of. So I want to look at a specific example, and that's a lot of text, but it's coming in from somebody who survived the 2017 hurricanes in Puerto Rico. And he talks about not knowing what's going on in the context of this natural disaster or these multiple hurricanes that were occurring, not even being able to contact his mom. And he goes on to say, anxiety grew. I had poor concentration, erratic sleep, distressing nightmares, and was startled when hearing sirens or gunshots at night. Agitation and anxiety would alternate with apathy, withdrawal, and numbness. Some symptoms improved, but I struggled to stay motivated and productive. I wanted to forget what happened, but how could I? Debris still lines the street, some towering as high as homes. One of the hardest realizations was that recovery from this hurricane would not take months, but years. This was a rude awakening to the vulnerability of the very institutions that are expected to be able to respond in situations such as these. Hope waxes and wanes. Now, I chose this quote because I think that it really exemplifies and maybe helps to validate typical trauma responses. So a cornerstone of trauma is experiencing a sense of helplessness and being out of control. And we hear this at the end when he talks about no one who was supposed to respond to the situation in that moment was responding. He felt like no one was there to help him get out of it. Right? That's a certain feeling of helplessness. It's an acute response to trauma. We also see some of the quintessential symptoms of PTSD in what he's describing. So we see re-experiencing, which can look like intrusive thoughts or flashbacks we talk about a lot with PTSD, can look like recurrent nightmares. We see some avoidance. So he talks about wanting to forget about what happened, which is another symptom of PTSD, because when we feel distressed, we try to avoid, because it's not nice to sit there with those feelings. He talks about changes in his thoughts and feelings for the negative, so a lot of detachment from the things that typically brought him joy or the people that brought him joy. Again, this is a common trauma response after experiencing something so difficult. And he also talks about this increase in arousal and reactivity. We might talk about this as hypervigilance. So he talks about this increase in a startle response, having a hard time concentrating, and difficulty sleeping. So I'd like to use this as an example to describe not just natural disasters as trauma, but really looking at what do we mean by trauma and what can a trauma response look like. Now, I'm going to end with some ways to cope after experiencing a natural disaster, because I think it's important to note that there are things that we can do to personally be resilient in the context of these experiences. So the first is a very natural response for many people to a trauma, and it's to tend and befriend. So what many people do when they've experienced a disaster, both natural and man-made, is they tend to look for those folks more vulnerable than them, often children or the elderly, and think about how they can take care of those individuals. This can be helpful because it creates more resilient communities, but it also helps to reestablish a sense of agency for oneself. It can also be helpful, this comes with an asterisk, to avoid avoiding. And what I mean by this is after a few weeks of this trauma having occurred, it can be helpful to talk about what you experienced, because when we do avoid, that brings about some short-term relief, but it can increase distress in the long term. So it's important to be able to talk about what we went through. That being said, the night after a traumatic experience, a natural disaster, isn't necessarily the time to talk about everything that happened. It's really powerful in those moments to
instead kind of turn your eyes away from doom scrolling, right? Like keeping updated on everything terrible that's happening, limiting your news exposure, and engaging in things that bring you joy and calm, which can feel sometimes ridiculous when you've just experienced a natural disaster. It's like, I'm gonna read a book after I just lost my home. So this can bring up a lot of feelings, but it's an important part of self-care and promoting your own resilience. And then lastly, I like to tell people to always be gracious with ourselves. Healing is nonlinear. You have good days and you have bad days. So after experiencing something like a natural disaster, it's good to be gentle with yourself and allow yourself to grow and heal in whatever capacity that's going to look like for you. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you. My name is Selma Holden. I'm an associate professor at the College of Osteopathic Medicine in the primary care department. I work in the Center of Excellence in Public Health, helping out with some opioid use disorder prevention programs, and I'm a medication-assisted therapist in a private mental health clinic up in Portland. So today I'm talking as somebody who's in the sandwich generation. So I'm a mother and I'm a daughter, and I have children and I have aging parents. And so I'm gonna take some liberties about talking the older generations and then the younger generations, knowing that I'm an intersection between those two. I also am somebody who's cisgendered, white, comes from a lot of privilege, and I'm just a student in this area, so I'm trying to acknowledge some of the knowledge gaps I have, but I'm also learning always about this. So I wanted to follow up on some of the comments that you made, Dr. Paulo, because I think I loved what you raised about the post-traumatic stress disorder that can occur from extreme weather events. Extreme weather events are something that we can easily measure. They make clear signals that we can look in the data, and then we can look at how people are responding afterwards. In the mental health area that I'm in, there's a discussion about maybe we shouldn't call it post-traumatic stress disorder, and maybe we should call it post-traumatic stress reaction. Because when people experience traumatic events, there are natural emotions that people are going to have. And so when we talk about re-experiencing an avoidance, maybe that's just on a spectrum of anxiety. And yes, there's a disordered place that people can go with the anxiety, but that's not the only place. There is this whole spectrum of just, it's normal and natural. Like say you're having negative thoughts and feelings. That's feeling sad and depressed. And those emotions move, well, including arousal and hyperactivity, the hypervigilance piece, and that's anger. And so is it really disordered to have emotional responses to traumatic events? Is sort of the question that's going on in this process. And how would the health of the people who experience trauma be shifted if the emotions were approached as normal reactions to be with and components of human life to work through and grow with? And sort of this bounce back and the resilience, and how do we grow from traumatic events? And so this piece that's going on is that when you think about natural disasters, those are sort of what we might call the big T traumas that happen. They're clear, they're documented, and looked at. But there's this also creep of the slow traumas that are happening within climate collapse or crisis. So droughts, rising sea levels, losing access to clean water. How is that impacting agriculture? How is that impacting land use? How is that impacting economics? And then we're going into the stream of climate refugees. But those slow shifts are much harder to measure. And so the piece is that these subtle events are still being felt, and from a younger generational perspective, or those who are at the disadvantage of it, it could really bring up resentment in that piece. And so I was interested in the generational piece. So here's just a picture of the generation. This is where I'm going to stand and say that there's this well-documented quote-unquote generational divide. It was sort of brought up in the panel that I was in, the climate justice just before, in the sense of it was politicized, but I'm going to put it in sort of the age perspective. Is that despite the multiple lines of evidence clearly showing that climate collapse is happening, that we're in a crisis, that we're having clearly recorded mental health effects and physical health effects and beyond, there's still a debate going on in the upper generation. And so Reverend Powell brought up the climate deniers and sort of the narrative about how that was a reaction from corporations who had oil interests. And that has a lasting effect. And with that debate still happening in the people who are older and in power, that is stalling the changes in policy. And with that stalling and change in policy, that's going to be experienced by other people as a lack of support, as neglect, as these just being ignored. And therefore, the younger generation is inheriting this burden. And the younger generation in the polls, they more readily accept and acknowledge that that we are in a climate crisis. So there was another point in there, sorry. So the climate, and I also just want to say that I also appreciate Reverend Powell standing up and saying, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization about all the older generation, right? There are some hardcore activists who have been really trying to put up a fight for a long period of time. It's just that when we get into these polarizing situations, those of us who then are in the younger generation can say, well, you all messed up the older people up there, or something along those lines, and vice versa. So the thing is that resentment and feelings like that, it's pretty difficult to cultivate compassionate perspectives towards the older generation. Can people really think, well, maybe they were just thinking about a lot, they were nervous about a lot of other things, and they were pragmatically dealing with more immediate needs, the more immediate need for shelter, the more immediate need for social stability and economic security. Maybe they don't want to feel the uncomfortable feelings of shame and the hopelessness around it. So what I'm curious about is, what if we could find a common ground about the shared grief around this? And I'm curious about this. A lot of other people are curious about this as well. So if a shared understanding is that a substantially profound loss is happening, and there's going to be something that the younger generations are not going to be able to experience. We're turning to the younger generations that are saying, now, like as I jump back and forth, you all have to conserve your oil consumption, all right? And so there's sort of this restrictive perspective that's happening that way as well. And then, so there's these pieces about the grief around it. And what I feel are some helpful steps for people to be in the grief with other people is to change the language from climate change, which is kind of euphemistic at this point, and to say things such as climate collapse or climate crisis. And so can people in the older generations slip into that more uncomfortable territory that's at least giving some acknowledgement of that loss? And then if the older generations could understand that there is a grief process that is going on. And in this grief process, there's going to be anxiety, there's going to be sadness, there's going to be anger. And that is normal and justified, is the piece too. And so, so then from a therapeutic perspective, when emotions are happening, or just from a parenting perspective, what you want to acknowledge the existence of the feelings. You don't want to deny them. You want to allow people to express their feelings. You don't want to allow people to suppress them. So this piece about like the processing that happens after traumatic events. And then through that, in most circumstances, the emotions will evolve naturally. They don't stay forever. It's often the unexpressed emotions that then become pathologized. And so, so I want to go into the example with anger. I'm almost done. From the anger perspective, going back to that piece about the younger generation are justified in being anger. And we have this colonialist history, and I'm going to put in sort of this white, privileged, upper middle class female perspective about how I was taught to deal with anger, and what were appropriate ways to express anger and what were inappropriate ways to express anger. And that, what I find is helpful is that anger is very healthy when boundaries are violated or when safety is in threat. And that, I think, are justifiable reasons about what the younger generation is inheriting. Their safety is at threat. Boundaries of trust from their elder generations have been violated in that sense. And so the perspective, though, going back to a psychodynamic perspective, is that anger that is turned inward because people aren't allowed to express anger outwardly turns into depression. And so when we think about the increase in depression going on, is this because the anger is not allowed to be expressed in certain ways? And so then the question is, how do we express anger? Because in a therapeutic perspective, anger is actually a better emotion to work with somebody than sadness, because anger is activating. And so the attitude is, I'd rather be mad than sad, because mad makes me do something. And so then the ask is, how do we have the anger in a way that's not destructive? How do we channel the anger in a way that motivates people, that gets change going in a way that's going to be transformative and hopefully not entirely destructive? Because, all right, so it's sort of the final thing. So the pieces is that it's sort of like so this is a lot of different conceptual frameworks about how we're approaching anger, how we're approaching post-traumatic stress, and these pieces behind it. Because I think a narrative that I've been enjoying recently is that typically we'll hear this, we have to save the earth. And it can come from this anger place. And it's sort of this, it's this idea that we are going to save the earth. And I have a dark reality that actually we're going to destroy ourselves, and the earth is going to be messed up for a while, but it's going to be fine. It's going to reach a new state of homeostasis. It's going to be beautiful in its own ways, and will be gone. And so there is this piece about so are we really going to save the earth, or is our process to more serve the earth and allow the earth to save us? Because when you look into the literature about how to engage, they find that people who want to navigate the harder emotions of climate change, climate collapse, engaging in the environment, being in the environment, and just doing simple, small things to help out in the environment has these very helpful effects for mood and attitude. So the relationship I really enjoy, just to finish this up, thank you for your patience, is Robin Wallace Kimmoners, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. She's just has a beautiful native perspective that it's not the earth that is broken, it's our relationship to the earth that's broken. And so if we could find ways to shift our relationship, so that's why I like serving the earth, or the earth is actually saving me. And my duty is just to serve the earth and to go ahead with that, as opposed to being angry at other people and being like, you got to save the earth. Right. So, and then the hope with that is that it's also a way to maintain sustainability. I can't speak tonight. So this piece about anger, if it burns you too much, you're going to burn out. And so how to just titrate the anger in ways that it will be a nice fuel for you going on, and you'll be able to do this for the many decades, such as the Reverend's been doing it and others. So thank you.
And what a perfect segue into mine. Hi, I'm Erin Neptune. I am the health and wellness educator. And I tend to tell people I have an insatiable hunger for knowledge. Insatiable. It means I can't get enough. And I'm constantly thinking that I'll never know enough. And I've spent years of my life reframing that in my head as, what else can I learn? And I've learned that there's benefit to slowing down so that I can do more of the things that I'm passionate about, but I'll get to that in a minute. My goal in life, both professionally and personally, is to help people cultivate sustainable self-transformation, and that has to include myself. I feel it's important to tell you all, especially for this talk, that I've struggled and thrived with mental illness my entire life. And I express that because in addition to my research and my education, my approach to well-being comes from a deep sense of empathy. I want to show everyone that there's endless possibilities, experiences, and strategies we can all discover and keep discovering to help improve our lives. And over the last decade or so, I found that the more anxiety and the fear that I had, the more limitations I felt, and the more I felt like I was running out of time. Because we all want to save the world, right? But by choosing to meditate for 60 minutes or to go for a 3-mile walk, I didn't lose an hour in the day, because the more I find time for things that decrease this like sheer metaphorical and sometimes physical weight and heaviness of anxiety and fear, the more I seem to accomplish in less time. And yes, that is a reference to Einstein's theory of relativity and time dilation, but there's not enough time to get into that. My point is that there is time to take care of ourselves if we only know how. And one of my biggest roles here at UNE as the health and wellness educator is to help people figure out what they need to do for their own well-being. Because self-care means something different at all points in our life. And I've found it overwhelming at times, this ardent passion, overcompensating for others' lack of care for others, our planet, and themselves, burning myself out to ultimately end up helping no one, and no quick fix was sustainable. So improving overall well-being needs to be intentional, consistent, approached with a compassionate curiosity, without judgment of wherever we're at. But there's times where I didn't know where to turn. So over the last few years, I've developed a wellness assessment called Waves of Wellness. And it's a way to help identify what to do about the aspects of wellness that might need some attention. And sometimes the stress is overwhelming and overstimulating, because even if we recognize what we need to do we even do it? And I help people take this overwhelming hurricane of a vague, overarching stress response to help find some tangible solutions. And we're not alone. And we all need different sorts of help and direction from time to time. Because as the health and wellness educator, sure, I help people with personalized nutrition plans and education. I run weekly yoga classes and mindfulness activities each day of the week here on campus. But I don't know all of the answers. I'm here to be a liaison for whatever you might need, and to connect you to different departments like mine, recreation and wellness. Because whether it's learning how to pack a day pack safely to go for a hike, or to learn how to use the pit shark in the fitness center, we all need different things. And sure, we're trying to help you become more aware of your own skills, but we want you to cope better with whatever life throws at you. And I've tried to do it all, and I'm here telling you that it just doesn't work. I can't help anyone if I can't help myself first. And these resources, they're the compass, not the map. Each one of us ultimately has to choose our own path. So non-judgment, compassionate curiosity, and utilizing resources are what I've found to make self-transformation attainable and sustainable, because change happens regardless, and how we adapt to change makes all the difference in the world, so that we can continue to fight to change the future of our world. Thank you.
Thank you for all your comments on navigating climate anxiety. At this time, I would like to open up to questions or comments. Feel free to address your questions to the entire panel, to a particular person, or to the entire audience.
Hi guys. First of all, that was like incredible. My question is kind of related to fear tactics in terms of like when, say, you're watching the news or you're scrolling and on a news feed and all you're seeing is just all the negative things going on, but you also know that it is important to educate yourself on what's going on, obviously, in current events. So, like, what are your recommendations or suggestions in terms of, like, dealing with that fear after watching the news and like keeping yourself informed what's going on, but not letting it like stop you from like making changes in your life, if that makes sense?
A lot of ideas. We all have a lot of ideas about this one. I think limiting the amount of time you spend with news is super important. You know, don't overdo it. And, a lot of the panelists have talked about connection, and, maybe you watch the news with somebody else and you take turns listening and you get to, just hearkening back to what I shared, maybe you shake a little or maybe you laugh or, allow yourself to have the feelings, right, in that situation, ideally with another friend, and stay connected. Don't get isolated in it all. That's my key recommendation.
I wholeheartedly agree with those. I think the other thing is to really think about the sources you're getting information from, and if those are difficult for you to endure, then you shouldn't do that. That's not helpful in learning and understanding the world. And I think that's the one thing, is we have to learn to be really critical consumers of information. And you're at a university and there are all sorts of pieces of information and data that's going to give you information that you can process. So I think you go on that curiosity scavenger hunt to find what you need, but it's really important to step back, because the media isn't going, well, it's going to help you know what's going on in the world from their perspective, but you need to develop your own perspective and find that information in different ways. So I think that's what I would say.
And I would maybe add on to that. I know sometimes when I have this experience, I feel like I can't allow myself to stop being angry. Like if I stop being angry, I'm giving up something important, I'm becoming apathetic or complacent. And I think those are the moments where I remind myself that it's important that I, as a human, because I believe this of humans, we have a right to enjoy the world as well as to change it. And so I try to remind myself that it's okay for me to enjoy this beautiful world that I'm a part of. But I also think very concretely about what's within my control, like you're speaking to, and what's outside of my control. And I try to make a decision about one thing that I can be more intentional about the next week. So I feel like I'm doing something, but also giving myself that chance to say, it's okay to enjoy the world too. That seems to help me.
In addition to all of the above, I think actively seeking out sources that are happy or bring you joy, because a lot of the news that we, again, doom scroll, are somewhat programmed to get our attention and to like have a reaction, and they're not going to post about a nice fluffy cat or something. Like it's not going to be something super happy. So I don't know. I think it's also actively seeking out sources of information that don't have that reaction as well, because we're just so overexposed to it.
We do have time for another question. Yes.
Yeah, hi. When you're sharing information about climate change and stuff with other people, how do you avoid catastrophizing while still making the importance of the topic come across?
I think there's a lot to catastrophizing it. I think that's what we learned in the, some of the comments. We are in a crisis. And I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to be really upfront and clear that it's true and not get co-opted into saying that maybe it isn't. Having said that, having conversations that are civil and that we can come to some sort of agreement and understanding and help people understand and see the world differently is really, really important. So I think the best way to do that is to listen and not think about what you're going to say to somebody and how you're going to prove them wrong, but to listen to what they're saying and try to understand that from your perspective and then share it.
Yeah, and I think always having a balance of attention on how many good things are happening in the world with how many horrible things are happening in the world. And I always think there's more good than bad. happening in the world. And I do think I've had the privilege of hanging out with a lot of Passamaquoddy and Penobscot people and talking to them a bit about climate and getting their perspective on it. And I sense from them a little bit more confidence that they have withstood genocide, diseases and plagues and threats to their existence for centuries, and they have a slightly different take, that yes, it's awful, yes, it's a catastrophe, but they've lived through that kind of stuff before. So I see this kind of balance of attention that they have that I'd like to be around and kind of feel some of that we're going to go forward. They went forward. African heritage people went forward. They didn't get so discouraged by enslavement that it stopped them. They went forward. So I get a lot from paying attention to what other groups have withstood and still gone forward.
Yeah, there's a piece about the listening and trying to figure out who you're talking to. So I was up at Saddleback and a few months ago, and just having a casual conversation with a father and their child when I'm there with my child. And it's in that environment, it was that father did a really crafty way when we started going into the climate change conversation. He could bring up an example of hope and sort of this technological advancement in the piece. And so instead of catastrophizing to our 11, 12-year-old children, having this resource of what are the hopes. And then for the younger folks, they don't need more catastrophe. There's enough news going on in that piece. But then I might have more of an agenda when I'm talking with older folks and sort of trying to get a fire under them in that piece about, okay, so there's a piece about the audience.
Thank you so much. And we have come to the end of the hour. And before we close, we do have a brief video from the Worldwide Teach-In.
At your teach-in, you've discussed concrete actions you can move forward in your community. Time is short for climate injustice. Help others move from climate despair to climate action. As the young people say, now, not next month, not next year. Let's commit today, together, to create a just and sustainable future for people and planet.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
Obrigada a todos por se tornarem líderes em clima e justiça.
Thank you all for becoming leaders on climate and justice.
जलवायु और न्याय पर वर्ल्डवाइड टीचिंग में आप सभी का स्वागत है।
Thank you for joining us tonight, and please join me in thanking our panelists and everyone who participated in this discussion. This concludes our program for the evening, and we hope the information you have learned and talked about tonight will stay with you. Thank you again, and have a wonderful evening.